Hey y'all, Katie here with Team Evo AZ. Thank you so much for following us and listening to our podcast. Here is season 3, and we are super excited for this season. As you know, we are based in the Phoenix, Arizona area, servicing buyers and sellers throughout the valley. But what you might not have known is we are expanding nationwide. So if you know of anyone that might be looking to get into the real estate business or needs to buy or sell a property, but it is not in Arizona, we can still help. Please feel free to message us and enjoy the show. Hey everybody, it's Katie and
Matt.
And we are the married couple based here in Phoenix, Arizona, that do real estate. And here on our podcast, it is R.E.A.L, R.E.A.L, with Matt and Katie. What does that stand for, Matt? Do you remember?
I think it's real estate life. Yeah. You know what I mean? All the things that we have going on.
Exactly. So we talk a lot about real estate and a little bit about life. Today, we're going to be talking with the amazing Ryan Gilliam. He is back. He spends a lot of time with us on this show. Thank you so much, Ryan.
Thanks for having me back.
Welcome. And Gabe with Firebird Appraisals. We have not had an opportunity to interview you yet, Gabe, so I'm super excited for this. Yeah. And obviously, appraisers play a huge part in what we do.
Huge part.
I mean, pretty much every transaction, we're going to have an appraisal, right? So it's a big, giant deal for most people out there. So we're super excited to have you on. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Awesome. So let's jump right into it. And Ryan, you feel free to pipe in whenever you have something to say, or if you have a question, anything like that. If you have a question for Gabe, even. Just kind of wanted to get people up to speed if they're maybe not real familiar with appraisals, how they work, what they're for. Can you, in a nutshell, just kind of give us the basics of, appraisals or when you're appraising a home? How do you do it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of people are confused or not totally have a complete understanding of what we do. They confuse it with the home inspector, or
yes.
They want to know why we have to inspect or what we have to do. So it's a good question. I mean, basically, the client, the lender, is putting up money, right, behind the borrower to purchase a home or to refinance, and then they hire us to go out to do the appraisal inspection. Basically to make sure that the property is in a position that they can use as collateral for the money. So as part of the process of getting your loan, we're to go out and give an evaluation on the property. When we're out on the property, we're looking at the condition of the property, remodeling. We're verifying the square footage, that it matches what the tax assessor is saying. All these things, all these different variables goes into our report, and through that we develop, an opinion of value.
Awesome. And now there are different, correct me if I'm wrong, but there are different appraisals depending on the loan that you're getting, right? So you're going to do kind of a little bit of a different thing for an FHA versus a conventional in terms of that inspection portion. Am I right?
Yeah, there's a little differences. I mean, with the FHA appraisal, we got to inspect the attic, we got to inspect the appliances to make sure that they're functioning. We have to look at specific property characteristics, such as like chipping paint, trees lying on the roofs, different things that the FHA requires that maybe a conventional loan won't. But the process that we do at the house and the process we do at our office, as far as the research side, that's all the same. So whether you're doing an FHA conventional, or I do VA appraisals too, the initial research before we go out is all the same. If that makes
Katie
sense.
And Matt, I know a lot of listings, there's times where they say that they won't accept FHA, but they will accept conventional. So you feel like a lot of the time that might have to do with the, I guess the condition of the home, right?
Yeah.
And kind of what Gabe was saying, that FHA is going to require a little bit more than a conventional loan.
Yeah. What are those types of things that FHA would be looking for? Off the top of my head, I'm thinking water damage, wood rot, things like that. What else have you run into that would, be something that FHA or VA would require fixed?
I think surprisingly, I think the gap has really narrowed since the crash in 2008. property conditions back then of what, anything could get conventional financing back then. It didn't really matter about the condition of the home. You could have you could have a leaky roof.
Right.
You could still get financing through conventional lending. But since the crash and since all the mortgage realignment, whatever they did, that gap as far as property conditions and what we're required to report as conditions to the appraisal report has really narrowed. FHA, peeling paint, if the home's built in 1978 or prior, if there's any defective paint, we have to call for it. But in the same breath, if we see bare wood on a conventional appraisal, it's much more of a gray line now than it used to be. Now it's still minimum property standards we're looking at, and we're trying to figure out if that affects the structural integrity of the home. So even in a conventional loan, the minimum property standards that we're looking at as appraisers are still there, if that makes sense. Little things like FHA, they used to require leaky plumbing to be called for, missing flooring. Like those are things now that they don't require any longer. They just make us note them and comment on whether they impact marketability or if they impact marketability at that point.
Gotcha. What about, and this is very typical, you see in Arizona, especially homes that were built, prior to 1990s, that there was a lot of additions. People had them put on. Sometimes they didn't go ahead and get them permitted and sent through the city. I've noticed that sometimes FHA and VA are a little bit more critical when, your measurements don't match up to that of like the tax assessors. Are you able to include that, or what are usually some of the things that would allow you to do so or permit you not to do so?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of times additions, let's say we get in a home with an addition, and let's say county accepts it and it shows it on the sketch, and we go out there and there's no HVAC, it's a step down. And for whatever reason, they were able to get a permit to build this addition. But for us, it's not a livable area. And vice versa, let's say we go out to a home and there's no addition on tax, but we go out there and it's an addition, it's built similar to the main structure, it's heated and cooled, it flows functionally within the floor plan, then the appraiser can include it. So it's kind of there's no exact formula other than the addition needs to be built in a workmanlike manner. It needs to flow with the house, and it should be heated and vented.
And what you meant by step down, I think some of the viewers might wonder too. It's like when the flooring's not level throughout, like it steps down into a new area, correct?
Right, and you see that a lot with patio additions, right? Enclosures of the patio, because the patio is always going to be a step down when you walk outside. So a lot of times that's the easiest, most affordable way to add square footage to your home is just to include include an addition around where the patio used to be. We spend a lot.
So, and that's a great for all our listeners to really, if you're thinking about doing an addition and you're ultimately thinking of selling, in the future, make sure that you really consider that, because you could go through and really spruce it all up to look nice cosmetically. But if you're, forgetting to make sure that these things that an appraiser is going to need to give it the value that you're adding, it could kind of contradict your purposes. So good thing to think of.
Yeah, and those additions, even when they're not done exactly like the subject or like the main house, that doesn't mean they don't include value. A lot of times, we'll include them as a single line item on the grid. So we're not counting it as GLA on our report, but we are giving it value on the grid when we're comparing it to other homes.
So that's gross living area, right? So you actually don't say that's how much square footage the house has, but you give it, and I guess kind of an upgrade, like 25,000 in value, instead of showing it in the square footage, right?
Exactly. Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, and that's a good way to look at it too, because I think a lot of times people will be like, "Hey, I added on 200 square feet, right?" And then they start, as an agent or as a homeowner, they start comparing it to, my home used to be 1,400 square feet, but now it's 1,600 square feet, and I'm going to compare it to 1,600 square feet homes And those homes that was their original footprint. So that home's going to be superior. It's going to sell for more than your 1,400 square foot home with the enclosed patio.
And I think a lot of homeowners, especially nowadays, they really go with that cost per square foot approach when they're just trying to say, oh, our house is worth this per square foot. So what Gabe's ultimately saying is, if you're not, the same throughout, it's not going to have that same approach. If you had like a 200 square foot patio that you included, you're not going to get that, $220 a square foot that you might get for the standard structure.
Right.
So it's really good to know.
Yeah, that's huge. So Ryan, when the appraisal hits your desk and it has, unpermitted addition, or it has repairs that were called out by the appraiser, what happens then? What steps do you go through at that point?
Yeah, so if there was an unpermitted addition, kind of like Gabe said, we'll still allow it if the appraiser does use it in the square footage, and if it's done in a workmanlike manner, like you mentioned, and if it does fit the flow of the house. So, we've had a lot of homes recently, especially, that have had unpermitted additions, and we're still able to use that as a square footage and use it in the value. But in terms of repairs, yeah, so we do have to inform the agents as soon as we get a report that repairs are going to be required. So I know that typically has to go back to you, Katie, and Matt, and we really have to negotiate to get those done, because if an appraisal is subject to repairs, we do have to make sure that those repairs are completed before we could close on the home.
Right. And you kind of have to keep up on that, or the agents do rather, because then you have to send the appraiser back out. So Gabe's going to go back out, look at the property, make sure those repairs have been completed, sort of sign off on it, right? I mean, there's something, you get a little report you have to submit or something like that, right, Gabe?
Yeah, like if we get a repair inspection order from Ryan, we go back out, we look at the repairs that we required, take photos of them, and then it's a 1-page final report we send back to Ryan.
Yep.
But it's important, in the timeline of escrow, to make sure that we're getting those repairs done and we're getting the appraiser out there so that we're not getting too close to closing with that, because that can trip you up at the last minute.
Yeah.
So that's super important. Gabe, how do you determine value for things like pools or lot situation? Maybe I have the same exact home that's on, just a regular street in the middle of the subdivision, as I'm comparing to a cul-de-sac property. How do you go about those types of comparisons? I get that question a lot, especially on pools.
Yeah, I get that question a lot too. I think we basically use paired sale analysis, right? So we try to find a home that is exactly like, that are apples to apples, that have sold around the same time, one with the pool, one without. What's the premium on the one that sold with the pool? So we would figure out what that difference is. And then that's kind of where our adjustments come from. Now that's a very caveman explanation of it, but there's a lot more data behind that, but that's pretty much how the easiest way to explain it is: find two apples, one has a pool, one doesn't. How much did this one sell for more? And then that's kind of where we develop our basis for the adjustment.
I like that explanation, because I have spoken with several people in the past that think that pool is just a straight adjustment across the board.
Yeah.
But if you have a pool, it's going to be $25,000 in Eastmark. It's going to be $25,000 in South Mountain. It's going to be $25,000 in Scottsdale. That is not the case, right?
Not the case. No. And I mean, I think, because I get that question a lot, what's a pool worth in this neighborhood? What's my pool worth? If I build a pool, what's it going to be worth? And it's like, well, there's no set amount. But to answer your question, I know that's a good question. The secondary question you had about, hey, I have this house on the cul-de-sac and this one's not. That's a lot harder for us to determine, right? Because it's like, we don't have the data to be like, oh, we have 800 cul-de-sac lots that are exactly the same, and we have 800 that aren't. That's right. Really hard. I mean, some stuff impacts marketability, right? I mean, you guys know that as realtors, you walk into a house, and they both have brand new cabinetry, right? But this one has brand new gray paint cabinetry, which is like the new rave or whatever that new rave is. right? So there's no value difference as an appraiser. I mean, they both have brand new cabinets, but this one has a more desirable cabinet. So that impacts marketability versus value, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So that cul-de-sac lot is going to impact marketability. But for us to bring a value to it is a lot harder. If you get into like, hey, it's the cul-de-sac lot, it's pie shaped and we have 5,000 square foot more in lot space. Now that's something that we can figure out. But it being simply, hey, you know, we're kitty corner to a park, right? That's a marketability thing.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. And I think that's hard for a lot of people to wrap their heads around. So I appreciate that explanation there. What can sellers, in your opinion, what can sellers do to achieve more value in their home? And this is probably a whole other podcast, but real briefly.
Yeah, that's a loaded question. I mean, I think if you're looking at remodeling, like if it's a question of, hey, I have this amount of money and I want to put it into my home, where am I going to see the most return? We get that question a lot too. And that's always going to be your kitchen, right? I mean, your kitchen's where you're going to spend most of your time. And that's where kitchens, you know, decision makers make decisions based on the kitchen, right? So
that's right.
Guys
the
walk
decision
in
maker being the wife, he means.
Exactly. Yeah, guys walk in with their wife and the guy loves the backyard, the guy loves the garage, hey, it has extra garage. And the wife wants to know how big is the kitchen and what does it look like? So that's where people can put their money. That's where I would say initially put your money in the kitchen, put your money in the master bathroom, put your money in the floors. Like those three things I'd say would be the top three for me.
Yeah, a lot of people are looking into that right now just because they're like, all right, should we sell? Should we wait? You know, and I think a lot of people are pumping the brakes and saying, let's just make our castle a little nicer before we do this.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, we have this set amount of money. So that's really good information.
Yeah, great advice there. Appreciate that. In terms of the current market conditions, where all of our minds are blown, right? First off, but for you specifically, what are the biggest challenges that appraisers are facing right now in this seller's market?
Yeah, I mean keeping up, right? Keeping up with the appreciation is difficult because everything we do, you know, all the data we use is past data, right? I mean, we use closed sales from preferably the past 3 months, but like in a market of today, the past 3 months has changed tremendously, right? And then we use listings, which are actives or pendings, to kind of help support or see where the market's going. And we use that information and also market data information to develop time adjustments to try to support appreciation. But yeah, the most difficult thing for us is really for me working in the Southeast Valley, Gilbert. This is where I live, so I know the market. It's insane, and you know we don't really have a lot of listings.
Right.
Really difficult because the pending sales on there that are pending on MLS showing at 300,000, right, are actually pending at 325
or 350.
350, right, and that's important data for us.
Yeah.
But when we call the agents, they don't want to let us, you know, I don't know what that is, but they're like, no, we can't tell you that information. We can't tell you what it's under contract at, really. But in all reality, we need that information because we're trying to support the contract on this other home, which will probably be a comp for them, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So there's that, you know, there's that relationship too that we have to get around. So I think for us, it's just one, gathering the information we need and then being able to compute what appreciation really is for that home with time adjustments, right? And trying to keep up with the market.
And in this type of market, when you're facing this, when there's, you know, appreciation at the scale that we're seeing right now, you know, before traditionally, like you said, you'd have to reflect on the past and use sold properties. Are you able to use pending and active properties? Are you able to use them more in an appreciating market? Because sometimes you see, especially like other sellers agents or whoever who's trying to justify a higher price, and they send you a list of comps and it's all actives, or like there's no sold, or even buyers or sellers will do that. What are you encountering on that?
Yeah, I mean, we can't we can't indicate a value based off of listings. Like we're not allowed to do that. We have to use actually closed sales that have closed. But the listings they can support our indicated value. They can give the appraiser knowledge of knowing where the market's going, because that's stuff that will be closing. So that's future data or current data, future, if it's a listing. But so it's definitely important information for us, but at the same time, we need to have those closed sales, right? To kind of bracket and to help us and help support. So it's all one big picture, right? We have the closed sales we're using, we're doing time adjustments most likely in this market. And then we're looking at that grid versus what stuff's listed at. And that's kind of the ceiling of where we can go. So yeah, I mean, I know that's kind of not a very clear answer, but
as clear as it can be.
Yeah, I don't think anything's clear right now.
They help us support an appreciated value, or to see where the market is going.
Okay.
Is there anything else that a listing agent or a seller can do or provide to you prior to your visit that will not only help you with your job and your piece of it, but also help them achieve the value that they're essentially looking for?
I'm glad you asked that. I was hoping you would. I think a lot of times, I'm a real estate agent too.
Yeah. Well, hey.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times, talking to agents, I like to be approachable as an appraiser. So when agents call me, I'm not shut off. I'm not rude. I'm open to taking I think a lot of times agents feel helpless during this process of, we've made it this far. Now we're just waiting on that appraiser. Hopefully he doesn't
Holding our breath.
Right. Yeah. He's out, I think there's a feeling out there that's like, hey, I hope the appraiser doesn't kill our deal. But I think agents really need to, be ready, right? And educate themselves and don't feel helpless. Like, I think providing value for them would be, hey, this is why this listing sold for this much, little characteristics about it. Hey, it's in the school district. It's really remodeled. Did you see this house over here that's really remodeled? I know it might not be in our exact neighborhood, but it's exactly like us, right?
Good
Just
point.
different
Okay.
things that they can bring up to the appraiser. So the appraiser is like, oh, this person has actually done their homework. I think that's one of the really big things. Another really good thing that they can do is, in this market that we're in right now, come prepared, like have market data showing that we're increasing in value. And if they don't know how to do that, contact an appraiser to kind of mentor them on, hey, what's an appraiser looking for? How do you guys develop time adjustments? Like, is that something you can show me how to do, so that when in this market, I'll be ready and I can say, hey, look, in the past 12 months, we're increasing at 1.5%. And this is the data. This is what I've seen. I think, and that doesn't mean the appraiser is going to take that, but I think the appraiser is going to take you more seriously and say, hey, this person's done their homework. They know what they're talking about. Right.
Right.
There's a list of like upgrades or repairs that seller has done to the home. Does that help? Also to kind of show, what they've done since purchasing the house.
Yeah, I mean, I think that does help. I think having that list ready is good. The appraiser is going to visually look at that and see it. So a lot of times we'll get, inflated lists of like, hey, this is what we've done. And it's like
$50,000 counters.
Like, don't do that. I mean, appraisers do this every day, all day long. They know what stuff costs.
See right through that, yeah.
But I mean, stuff that might not be able to see, right? So, I mean, you can see new windows, but a lot of times windows look like windows, but they're expensive. So if you put in new windows, let the appraiser know. If you put in foam insulation, let the appraiser know. If you put a brand new HVAC on and it's on the roof, let the appraiser know. Some things the appraiser can't see, and those kind of things are good to bring to their attention.
Yeah, that's good. Now, I guess going back on that, you sometimes have people say, hey, this home's worth so much more because we remodeled it 9 years ago or 8 years ago. When is like your cutoff for like newly remodeled stuff versus, something that would be new, like today versus 3 years ago?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we look at it as condition, right? So I'll walk in a house and maybe it was remodeled 5 years ago and it has white cabinets, it has um, quartz countertops. Like it looks like it's still in a good condition, right? It's still very nice. It's still desirable to today's standards and tastes that matters. Versus one that you walk in and you smell the newness. That's a little bit different, right? So even though the upgrades and the features might be the same or very similar, the condition of the home's different. So there's a different adjustment we make for that kind of stuff. But as far as a cutoff, yeah, I mean, and the market's going to dictate that, right? Like if stuff's a 15-year remodel and it was really cool 15 years ago, travertine everywhere, and and they're like, hey, we remodeled this, and you're like, yeah, you did, but that was a while ago, and today's standards are different. I think the market dictates that in a lot of ways.
Okay. And I think that was the reason, because we do have a lot of sellers that, and once again, it's very difficult when someone's very emotional about their remodel they did 15 years ago, and and they are over 60 years old. So 15 years ago really isn't a long period of time to them. So they're like, we just did it, it's beautiful, it's Tuscan, and so it's so hard to kind of articulate to them to sometimes like, listen, yeah, it's beautiful, but it's not new. You might not get that same value that from the appraiser. So, okay.
Good discussion. Ryan, do you have any questions for Gabe or anything that's popping up for you right now in this market that you think is important to chat about?
Yeah, we get a lot of questions actually from clients doing refinances mostly who feel like they know an appraiser and they want to use a specific appraiser for their house. So we have to address this up front with a lot of our clients that unfortunately we can't really pick appraisers anymore. Back, during kind of the downturn in the market around 2008, 9, and 10, they basically changed the guidelines. That they saw in the past that there were too close of relationships between lenders and appraisers, and that sometimes had an effect on values. So to basically kind of circumvent that from happening anymore, what we're required to do now is we actually have a group of about 20 different appraisers. And when we send in a new order for a purchase or refinance, it randomly selects one of those appraisers. And we can't even really have any contact with them until we get the appraisal back and we know who did the report. So that's something I have to address with a lot of our clients, that they can't just pick our appraisers, that we do have to randomly select one, and we can't really have too much communication with them up front.
That's a great point. I have buyers that ask me if they can pick their appraiser.
Yeah.
Because, back in the day, like,
I remember doing
things were different.
I had my appraiser. I bought him 6 packs of beer all the time.
Yeah.
Hey, stop giving away your secrets. So that actually brings up another question in my mind, and this might be a little bit more for you, Ryan, but desktop appraisals versus in-person appraisals. When did the desktops come into play? What's the difference? Can you speak a little bit on that?
Yeah, over the past year and a half or so, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac do allow us to possibly get what's called an appraisal waiver. And really what they do is they kind of have these almost like Zillow on steroids type systems, where you could basically plug in like a purchase price, or on to refinance maybe an estimated value. And if they feel like, based off of all their calculations, that the value is pretty close to that amount, and if the client has enough equity in the home, at certain cases, we actually get a waiver. And it's basically them saying, we don't need an appraisal on this home. We feel like the value that you guys are setting in the system is pretty accurate, and there's enough equity that we're comfortable not requiring one. So we are starting to get those more and more often. I would probably say maybe 25% of them right now, depending on equity, clients' credit scores, and how much the purchase price is, are getting waivers. So I know that's important in this kind of a market as well. Katie and Matt, you could probably speak to this. I know I've gotten some questions for you sometimes, like, will this get a waiver? Because that's going to help if we don't get an appraisal, because you could basically offer a little bit more and not be in jeopardy of having an appraisal come in low.
Exactly. And sellers are loving that right now. Oh,
yeah.
There's so many waivers. It's so crazy. But anyway, any other questions for Gabe before we wrap this up?
No, I don't. I think you've kind of given us all the answers that we need.
Yeah, Gabe, you're awesome. Thank you so much. If somebody would like to touch base with you, follow you, call you for a value, how can they do so? How can they contact you?
I think the best way is through my email. They can email me at Gabe, G-A-B-E, at firebirdappraisals.com.
Awesome. All right. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for being with us also. Gabe, thank you so
You're
much
welcome,
for your
Gabe. Thanks,
time.
Ryan.
This was incredible. We appreciate it, guys.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
so much.
Have a great day.
Bye.
All right. Bye.